As harpists, we know that the sheet music out there for harp is not exactly plentiful, and while it is getting better, sometimes the only thing you can find for the song you want to play is piano sheet music. You can absolutely play off of piano sheet music because it looks the same with the grand staff and the notation looks the same, but you might need to make some adjustments to make it a little more harp friendly. And before I forget to introduce myself, I'm Samantha. Welcome back to the Harp Studio, and let's dive right into adjusting some piano music for harp. The first consideration you're going to want to think about is the key that your piece is in. If you're playing on a pedal harp, this is less of a big deal because the pedal harp can play in more keys than a lever harp can, but if the original key has a lot of sharps in it, it might be more comfortable to transpose into a key with flats, especially if there are a lot of places where you have to raise pitches into double sharps. If you're playing a harp with levers or no levers, you're going to want to make sure that that key signature is playable for you. If you have a full set of levers, typically you're going to be able to play in keys with up to 3 flats or up to 4 sharps. If you have less levers or none at all, you're just going to want to double check that that key signature is something that you can play on your instrument. If it isn't, you might want to transpose it into a different key. Sometimes if you're buying sheet music from a website like musicnotes.com, you can actually just order the sheet music in the key you want and it'll transpose it for you and save you some time. But if that's not possible, then the least theory intensive method, though quite time consuming way of transposing your sheet music is going to be to type it into a music notation software such as MuseScore and then letting the software transpose it into whatever key you want. This also goes for modulations in the music, so sometimes piano music will change key partway through, and if it's too hard to change your levers or pedals in order to accommodate that key change, you can either just cut out the modulating section or you can transpose it. Now, probably the most troublesome part of adapting piano music for the harp is dealing with accidentals. Accidentals are any time in the music there's a symbol that tells you to play a sharp, natural, or flat that isn't in the key signature. And what that means for the harp is that you're going to have to change a pedal or a lever in order to play that note. For any accidentals you can't or don't want to play, here are a few options you can try out to make it playable on your harp, and you can see what adaptation you like the best. Your first option is to see if you can use an enharmonic spelling of the note in question. So could you play that accidental on a different string? So for example, could you play that D flat as a C sharp instead? Or on a pedal harp, could you play that E natural as an F flat? Your second and easiest option is just to leave the note out. You gotta ask yourself, is this note actually important, and will you miss it if it's gone? Sometimes it's actually quite easy to just leave a note out, and that's especially true if it's part of the left-hand accompaniment. This next one is only applicable for lever harps, but sometimes if you really want to keep that accidental note, what you can do is actually play it in a different octave than it's originally written, so that you can set up a lever when it's more convenient in a place on your harp that's out of the way of the rest of the song, so you can still play that accidental without totally tangling up your hands in lever changes when the moment comes. Sometimes you can also substitute a different note in for the accidental note. This definitely does change how a melody will sound if you have to use it in that context, but sometimes it's your only option. So try switching in some different notes in place of that accidental and see how it sounds. To be honest, this subject of how to deal with accidentals that you can't play could be a whole video in itself, so if that's something you'd be interested in, please leave me a comment, and maybe that's something I can cover in a future video. Now, the last thing you're going to have to deal with if you're working with piano sheet music is what I kind of call unwieldy writing. As harpists, we only play with 4 fingers out of our hand. Pianists play with 5, so they can play a lot more notes, and just the manner in which pianists play tend to allow them to just play more notes than is really practical on the harp. One example of this is 5 or 6 note patterns that are all moving the same direction that repeat over and over and over again. If you don't want to be crossing over and under constantly, then you can either leave out some of the notes in the pattern, or you can rewrite it so that it changes direction at some point by using notes from within the pattern. Something else that may very well show up in your piano music that you're trying to read off of is repeating notes or repeating chords. Because of the way that piano is played, it's much easier to repeat a note than it is on the harp. If you get something that has a lot of repeated single notes that are way too fast for you to play on the harp, you can sometimes just combine them and play fewer of them. If you get something that has a lot of repeated chords that are too fast to play, there's a couple of options here. Sometimes you can just play the first chord and then just play 1 note out of the chord on the following repetitions, or you could play 3 notes on the first chord and then 2 notes on the repeated chords, because sometimes playing 2 notes is easier than 3. Or you can rewrite the passage into something easier to play, such as an arpeggiated broken chord in the same rhythm. Or, as always, just leave it out. don't forget that your hands can help each other out sometimes. Just because something is written on a top staff or a bottom staff doesn't mean that the other hand that doesn't usually play in that staff can't go and help out. So if you've got a really busy passage in one staff or the other, and the other hand isn't doing a whole lot, grab that hand, take it down, and get it to play some of the notes in the passage. It's going to make it a lot easier to play. Honestly, sometimes piano parts just have way too many notes in them. Darn pianists and their pinky fingers. A lot of the time on the harp, less is more, so go ahead and just take out whatever notes you need to make it playable for yourself. If you want some guidance on which notes are safe to remove, check out this video here. In the end though, I really think that the best way to make the best possible adaptation for you and your harp is to really understand the big picture of what's going on in the music that lets you make choices about what to keep, what to drop, and what to rewrite. I've made a whole course on how to do that, and you don't need to know any music theory to do it, so if that's something you're interested in, check out the link in the description. That's it for today. Happy harping.